Hello and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 29th installment in our ongoing series. For our first episode of 2025, IGS President Lance Strate interviews computer programmer and activist Brianna Wu. Their conversation covers Gamergate, feminism, transsexual issues, and politics and activism. Let's hear what they have to say.
Well, welcome to another episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. I'm here with Brianna Wu. Welcome, Brianna.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me on. I want to confess to you, I was not the best student, actually, so I'm a little nervous about this hit today.
Well, that's quite all right. In all honesty, I wasn't either.
Really?
Uh, yeah, that does happen, but in any event, you certainly have had a very interesting career, and really looking forward to talking to you about it.
Thank
Um,
you.
my understanding is that you originated from down south.
I did. Good old down home Mississippi. So I don't know if you can tell it. I sometimes still have like 10% accent, so I haven't quite gotten rid of it, but I do my best.
It doesn't really sound that way. It doesn't sound like a Boston accent either.
No,
So,
no.
maybe you've kind of hit on the standard American English kind of Midwestern uh, talk. I my New York background comes out in, with certain words like talk or idea.
Yes.
So,
If linguistically, I think like this is hand to God. If you asked me linguistically what I feel like I must align with, I think it would be Valley Girl. Like,
oh,
I don't know how I picked this up, but like I listened to that, it just makes sense to me. And it was very confusing for my parents as well.
well, that did spread beyond California
It
eventually.
did.
So,
Valley
but
speak.
yeah, I do remember when that came in all of a sudden, and I also, just to be clear, I'm an old guy, so for me, video games, just to start talking about that. I mean, I remember playing the first generation of arcade games, Pong and
Oh
Space
yeah.
Invaders, and you know, uh, Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, and also playing. My first computer I got in 1981 was an Atari 800, and it
Oh,
had game cartridges, and I
yes.
got a disc, floppy disk with games. But and during that time, and even a little later, getting shareware off of AOL, off of America Online, gaming was very much a one person kind of thing. It was just you did it alone, and even weren't many people to talk to about
That's
playing
true.
games, and to you couldn't get cheat codes or anything like that. I mean, I remember picking
Mm,
up a paperback book on how to play the arcade Pac-Man, like what moves
yes.
to make, and
Yep.
buying like code books from Infocom for their text adventures. But you got into developing games.
I did. I
I,
think we're about the same age actually, because I did all that stuff too. Like Haze commands on 2800 baud modem. Did you do that, or did you download Commander Keen back in the day when that was shareware?
no, I came into that a little later, but I'm a bit older. But you got into computer programming
I
and
sure did.
gaming. Can you tell us
Yeah.
a bit about how that came to pass?
Well, I didn't really fit into the standard Mississippi scene that they were trying to put me into. So it was really interesting, actually. It was hard to get a computer science education in Mississippi in the 80s, right? I was very fortunate to grow up in a fairly rich family. And, like we had BASIC on our computers, and I figured that out, and, Turbo Pascal. But it was like I had to go over to the University of Southern Mississippi, believe it or not, as like
Hmm.
a 13-year-old and take college classes in
Wow.
computer programming, like not for a grade, just to sit there and have somebody qualified teach me how to do it. So it was a bit of a serendipitous path, if that makes sense.
Was that on a mainframe?
No, we had PCs back then.
When I was in high school, I took a class on computing at Columbia University on a Saturday morning, but and I didn't stay with it. I just went a few times, and it was just these punch cards
Yes.
that and when I was a first year student, the engineers in my dorm all had to stay up all night, and they had their stacks of punch cards that they would feed in to get their printouts and all of that. So quite different from what later came about. So what were
So
you?
when you're programming on punch cards, were you programming in assembly? Like, because ultimately a punch card is like a binary state. So I've always wanted to know, is there like an
Yeah,
abstraction layer with
I
that?
think it was
Or
Fortran.
okay, okay.
I know the engineers were learning Fortran with punch cards. I don't remember now what it was
Mhm.
for me. But what were you? You said Pascal, but what were you learning on? What kind of computers?
Oh gosh, it was my first computer was an 8086. I had an 8088, and then obviously the PC came out. So 286, 386, 486 was there from Windows 95 when that came out. So really just the entire history of computing. I've been there all the way. It was really, really fortunate. My mom, yeah, God love her. She's a Southern gal, and she would do a whole bunch of accounting stuff for my dad's businesses, and just always needed a really powerful machine, and I just took to it like a fish to water. So yeah, led
And
to an
what kind
interesting career.
and what kind of games were you creating?
Well, my main game that I'm best known for is Revolution 60. This was with when the Unreal Engine came out in around 2010 for iPhone. I was looking at it. And you've got to understand back then we didn't really, Apple had Sprite Kit. It didn't really have very powerful 3D development tools. So I really wanted to be ahead of the curve as far as bringing games to market, with women characters, but really telling stories, the kind of stories I found interesting. And yeah, I'm tremendously proud of the game that I shipped before Gamergate kind of tore my life apart. It was I think so many games are they don't really, they're not very friendly for people that aren't already gamers. And what I'm really proud about this game design is it's essentially a 4.5 hour animated movie, and you
Mhm.
just play along, you make your choices. There's no point in it where you die. You just play this animated 4 hour movie that anyone can pick up if they've never played a game before. If you're kicking someone, you slide across the screen. If you're going to a location, you just tap, and then it goes to the end. It adds up all the choices you make, and then you get to see your ending. And I'm really proud of this game design because there wasn't a good path or a bad path. You made your choices based on morality. If you tried to please everyone along the way, you got the worst ending. And if you picked a side, there was something good that happened, and there was something bad that happened. And I think that's a little bit like life. So there it is.
Wow. Well, I mean, again, going back to my early uh, understanding of things. I mean, certainly the online world was largely a male world, and that came up, and gaming was largely what guys were doing. Uh, Not that there weren't women involved, from the beginning, but that
Mhm.
there was this definite male dominance in
Yeah.
history. Um, and that's where, and I kind of remember reading about it, how like in the online world where people didn't, you didn't know who people were,
Yeah.
especially with the text-based, kind of games. And that one of the acronyms I found it very interesting that people would use was a capital M and then a small OR and a capital F. Um, so to mean male or female,
Oh,
asking.
yeah, yeah,
But I thought it very interesting that as an acronym, it also says morph,
yeah.
which it's kind of like that famous cartoon of the dog at the computer with the caption on the internet, "No one
I
knows
have
that
no.
you're a dog."
Yes, I
Um,
love that. Oh my goodness.
and early on, I don't know if you ever saw the miniseries Wild Palms, which so Oliver Stone produced it, and I think for ABC, but and there's a sequence. It's like kind of early in the internet age, and there's a sequence where there's this old Japanese fellow, and he's appearing in a virtual reality as a young ballerina. Uh, kind of bringing that to life.
Yes,
So, but you were coming in at a time where the industry was, and perhaps remains kind of male dominated, and you got involved with Gamergate.
I
So,
did.
um, I was wondering, I said, I certainly remember
Ooh,
reading about it, but I wasn't really, involved in it at all or following it. And I imagine many of our listeners don't know that much about it. So, can you tell us that story?
sure. Gamergate is basically, if you're think of the poisonous politics of today, where everything instantly becomes about personal destruction, where I mean, I'm sure you've seen this happen to your colleagues, even, right? Everything you've ever said is dug through by an anonymous mob, taken, weaponized against you. There's an attempt to destroy your career, and basically, the goal is to make the price of speaking up so high it's smarter to keep your mouth shut. Gamergate was really the first time this playbook was introduced at scale. It started in the video game industry, and at the highest level, it was a harassment campaign against, women like myself that were pushing for, women to be treated more fairly in the workplace. I understand that, a lot of women have concluded it's you don't get far in the workplace by talking about this stuff, but we tried back in 2014. There is a structural difficulty that a lot of women find in the game industry, and they try to basically advance their careers or get opportunities. It's very much a boys club. If I can just speak candidly, I think the
Please.
video game industry tends to attract a lot of Peter Pan types. They're good men, they're very good friends of mine, but they
Hmm.
also kind of just don't ever want to grow up, which is kind of what attracts them to that field, despite being brilliant. And it's a tough workplace. So we tried to raise awareness of that. There are a lot of edgy male gamers that felt we were trying to take away their culture, and death threats, rape threats. A lot of people like getting bullied out of the industry. It was just a lot. And it kind of became an international story. One of the interesting things about Gamergate is if you look at a lot of the major figures of it, Candace Owens, Mike Cernovich, Milo Yiannopoulos, Steve Bannon, they all came to the national scene from Gamergate, as did I. And we've all kind of just been on the national stage ever since, which is it's interesting.
Yeah. So what precipitated it? What exactly was you know, uh, the messages and what platform was it going on?
It was everywhere. The thing that really precipitated it is a jilted ex-boyfriend of someone named Zoe Quinn put out a blog basically accusing her of a bunch of sexual impropriety in the game industry. It turned out, like, just objectively much of it to be completely false. And a lot of people that felt the game journalists were having a cozy relationship with developers for progressive politics and kind of shoehorning that into games, they decided to go on a witch hunt and then decided to target a whole bunch of women in the game industry. I want to be clear. I've had a fairly public break with progressivism in the last few years. I definitely I can definitely see I can see how, with good intentions, some people on the left can take good causes and take it too far. I think we've really witnessed the extremes of that with recent events. But I think we can all agree that a woman should have the opportunity in the workplace for to be considered for promotions just like a man would.
Mhm.
And that was really my main issue in Gamergate.
Which apparently we can't all agree on that from the
Yes.
evidence. And as far as I mean, so it starts with the blog, and was it Twitter or some other?
Twitter, YouTube, newspapers, 4chan, 8chan, 8chan,
Oh,
the place that has sparked quite a few terrorist events. That actually came from Gamergate. So it's really interesting that this thing that I was part of really set the whole chapter of where politics went over since 2014, which I think we'd probably all agree has not been great. So,
so, and it really just a couple of years before 2016, where
yeah, Trump.
uh, we see some of this going beyond that
Yeah.
particular sector.
I
Uh,
mean, it's this is not my opinion. I'm not just saying this. Go read the New York Times. Like Steve Bannon came in, did the Gamergate playbook with the Trump campaign. Many people feel that's why he won, is using those grievance politics to, weaponizing identity. Many people feel that way, and I personally feel at this point it's two sides that are radicalizing each other. I don't need you to agree with me on that, but I've had a front row seat to progressivism for the last 10 years, and I've seen a lot of growing extremism that has truly troubled me. So,
well, I've followed you on X Twitter and for a little more than a year now. So I've seen it. It reminds me a bit of an old friend of mine, Camille Paglia,
oh
and
yes.
how she kind of broke with, or I mean, she really was a new brand of feminism, that she
Mhm.
represented. And in another way, another fellow who we had some interactions with in the Institute of General Semantics, John McWhorter,
Mhm.
um, who writes a column for the New York Times, and he's a Columbia professor, and he's had the same kind of thing about racism and just the kind of the protest about progressivism going too far.
Yeah. Well, something I think is really important, and yeah, I don't mean to get into a right versus left thing, but I came from a really conservative family in Mississippi, and I think you can appreciate this as someone that studies language. A military family, voted Republican, all of that stuff. And one of the things that really pushed me to more towards the Democratic side in college is, I noticed in Mississippi when we were talking about public policy, like what is the correct public policy for poor people, right? Or what should the pathway be? Should poor students trying to go to the University of Mississippi, should they pay less? Should they pay an equal amount? Like if you were talking about public policy problems for just things a country has to decide, my conservative friends would always default to a moral argument, and my Democratic friends could always they would resort to, well, here's a study, here's what we know, here's my thinking through it, and they're very eager to like explain their reasoning there. What I personally have seen the Democratic Party defaulting to in a way that really disturbs me is increasingly going to that moralized argument. You're a bad person if you don't agree with me. And I just, I think it's not persuasive to the middle, which is a political professional. That's who we always need to be talking to. But I think people don't like to be told to shut up when they have questions. I think Americans particularly like to talk about things. So I think like really honest, open, assuming good faith discussions. I truly believe that's where the power is in America, but maybe you
Mhm.
disagree.
No, no, I think you're quite totally right. And it's sort of interesting that you mentioned the moral argument because George Lakoff, who's in,
I love him.
oh,
Yes.
okay, yeah, and so, but he's been arguing that the Democrats need to make the moral argument and that they're not making the moral argument, uh, and providing that kind of framework, and instead sort of, I guess, being too rational and too intellectual
Mhm.
about things.
I think that's fair. Don't you think there's a difference in, what he advocates, which in my view is we need to have messages we can get across quickly, right? So
Mhm.
I can do that and I can say to you, it's really important that you have fire insurance on your house because if you don't, or rather you have a fire department, right? Because it's not just your choice, then your house burns down, your whole neighborhood burns down, and that's not fair to your neighbors. That's a moral argument, but it's not like saying, hey, shut up, don't ask that question.
Right.
How dare you? Like there's a difference in approach here. So I think we
Sure.
can get to a moral, I think we can talk about what's right for people without insinuating that they're a bad person if they disagree, or at least that's how I feel.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And say as a New Yorker, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I mean, that's just, there's just no other way to be here.
Yeah,
But you got into politics then, just to, you know, understand that, off of Gamergate or, from that experience that
I
sort of
did.
spurred you on and you ran for office as well.
I did. It was a wildly, I recommend everyone run for office. It really made me a better person. And what I mean by that is you have to really examine your flaws if you run for office. Like people are going to tell you what they think of you. You can't BS your way around that. But it also, like I literally sat in this chair and I would just spend 8 hours a day calling people from this chair.
Hmm.
And you would go out and you'd shake hundreds of hands at an event, knock on doors, and I really mean this like in a really maybe it sounds naive to you, but just meeting that many Americans and
Hmm.
really talking to them and understanding how they think about stuff. It's not that my beliefs changed, it's that I really understood how limited my perspective was as a feminist that came from the tech industry, that there was just a much wider amount of policy that people were thinking about. And just one example. Yeah, I'd
Hmm.
never really thought about how disability payments were apportioned by the state. And there's a legal process for this. There's requirements that you have to go through. And yeah, there's a real question if it's in the best interest of the disabled person. You have to learn about so many areas of like how our government is not serving people. It's really hard to walk away from that without a lot of compassion. So it's why I've just always been amazed so many politicians are dirtbags in my job. It's I don't know. I walked away from this feeling so much more empathy, and so many people seem to be so self-serving in this. It's very strange.
Wow. And it's funny you mentioned disability because it's something that I deal with. I have
Do you?
a daughter with autism
Oh my
that,
goodness.
where my wife and I are guardians of, and we were
Oh,
just
that's tough.
dealing with health care, health insurance and Medicare issues that, have come up. And so that's something that we're always grappling with,
Yeah.
certainly.
That's so difficult. How, yeah, I mean, what level of function does she have, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, not she
Yeah,
wouldn't be able to live on her own, and
yeah,
uh, yeah, so it's a lot of care that's needed.
that's so
Um,
difficult. I'm so
yeah,
sorry.
but
That's, yeah. Do you have any, I've always wanted to ask somebody this, like, do you have any like theories? Like from my point of view, it just, I remember I've been hiring young people for over 20 years with my job. Like my first startup was what year? 1998. And it's every single year, it's just more and more people on my team that you hire that end up, not with like very high levels of autism, but some level
mhm,
of autism.
sure.
And, I think for me as a manager, you've got to treat people that come in the door fairly and learn to roll with that. And you can, it's not that difficult, but it certainly seems to be increasing from what I can see. Do you have any, does that strike you as accurate or?
Oh, I mean, the statistics have been, I've have this one kind, basically one piece that I wrote about it because I'm not in healthcare or
Mhm.
psychology, but I wrote about it and I've revised it and published it in different places. And when I started out, I was had the figure of 1 in 1,000 when my daughter was very young, and now it's like 1 in maybe 50.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just and it's been the talk of an epidemic of autism. But certainly there are big differences between individuals with say Asperger's, and they talk
Hmm.
about like Elon Musk as someone like that,
Yeah.
as opposed to individuals who have moderate or severe autism. And then, you mentioned I actually, when my daughter was first diagnosed, I remember one of the professionals trying to, and they didn't know how bad it would be, but was trying to say, well, she'll probably be a computer programmer. Um, because that is an area, and
It-
it's where you don't need to deal a lot with social interaction, or at least a
mhm.
lot of the people who go into it. Uh, so they find a high prevalence of for individuals with autism with parents who are engineers,
Yeah.
scientists, people in technical areas, and who
Do you
go
know
into
what I've always
computing.
found, like hiring people on the spectrum is this is the paradigm I've come to see with it,
Yeah.
that if I have somebody that doesn't have autism,
Hmm.
it's like they go through light with a really big light, right? So if they're going into a social situation, they've got a really big light and they can figure all this stuff out, like a wide array of circumstances. And I find like my members on my team with autism, it's like they have a smaller light, but it shines much, much more brightly on this one area, which is why, like you mentioned, the game industry. I've never met a really good ML programmer, machine language programmer, that was on the spectrum to some degree. You just kind of have to like have a certain skill to be able to think in ones and zeros all day long. So, I think that yeah, this is where I feel so strongly. Like I wish when I was going to management school, I wish there had been some textbook that they had given me, like how do you deal with someone that has a social disorder? Because like a social anxiety, I'm sure you see this in your students, right? They're gonna show up for employment and we got to do something with them. How do you work with someone that has autism? How do you like work with this? And I think like yeah, the truth is I can sit here and pout and say the American workplace is changing versus what it was 20 years ago. And it is Gen X, which I'm part of. We just have a different style. But I think like the people coming out are the people coming out, and we've got to figure out like how to make them become the best version of themselves. So I don't know. I wish I had some books on that.
Well, that's a very interesting point, in terms of management and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if we get back to politics, then,
Yes,
so you ran for office in Boston, was it?
I did. Massachusetts District 8, right here in Dedham, Massachusetts,
For Congress?
for United States Congress against Stephen Lynch.
And how did that go?
I got what was it, about 25% of the vote. So not terrible for a first-time candidate that had no idea what she was doing. My goal with this was always I was going to run once, kind of figure out how it worked, build a fundraising base, and then build on that success and beat him the second time. Like that was my plan from the beginning because I'd just seen so many. Like if you look at the numbers, almost everyone loses their first race. It's the ones that learn what they need to learn and come back. So, I ran in 2018 and I was running again in 2020. And then what happened in 20, around that election was COVID.
Mhm.
And I was looking at the numbers, and it's very hard to run an upstart campaign against an incumbent when you cannot go get signatures to get on the ballot or hold events to go meet voters or go knock on doors. And realizing it was a suicide mission, I dropped out. And it was hard throwing away like 4 years of my life, but literally everyone challenging an incumbent lost that cycle. Everyone. Even Joe Kennedy lost against Ed Markey. So, I was it was the right call. And I try to think about it in terms that, I developed the skills that allow me to do my job now. Political fundraising, back channeling with electeds to talk about policies I'm passionate about, getting out the vote. These are all bread and butter skills in politics, and the only way to learn it is to do it. So I'm very proud of that work, if that makes sense.
And have you decided not to run again? I mean, and to instead be in that back room, so to speak,
I,
or
I
are
you
you
know, I've certainly
going?
thought about it. I'm sure you can hear my voice as we're talking.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with well, frankly, my vocal folds are failing. So it's just exacerbated it's genetic, exacerbated by a career where I have to talk all day long. Um, I flew actually to California just as it was catching on fire a few weeks ago to see a specialist there, and may have a path forward to fix it. I've got a surgery date for July 8th. So if I can fix that, I might consider it. But honestly, there are a lot of ways to serve your country that don't involve being the elected official. So I think we all have a role to play in turning the system around and fixing our country.
Well, in general semantics, perhaps the best known saying is the map is not the territory,
Hmm.
and also the word is not the thing. And I thought it was interesting about your last name, and that I guess some people uh, felt that there was somehow something wrong with you having that last name.
Yes, I don't know if this can be a video or an audio podcast, but I
It's
am
just
white.
pure audio,
All
pure
right,
audio. So.
I'm a white gal. My last name is Wu because I met a guy, I fell in love, and like I think it's 70% of American women. I took my husband's name, so people are very confused sometimes. They think they're the wildest theories out there. Like I'm trying to trick people into thinking I'm Chinese, and it's like, no, I just fell in love with a guy. That's it. It's not it's not more complicated than that. So there it is.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because I don't think it would be as something that people would bring up if it was an Italian name, say,
I
and you're
know.
Italian, uh, or or a Jewish last name,
Yes.
but it also reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where there was some
Donna
lady named
Chang.
whose last name was
Yes.
Lee, and people were turning to her because they thought she was dispensing Chinese wisdom.
Yeah, I don't really have any wisdom today, but I do love my husband a lot. We've been married for 17 years this year, so
Wow,
good times with him.
that's great. Um, well, the other thing, as I mentioned to you in our exchanges, was that one of the basic ideas in general semantics is they call the two-valued orientation, either or, um, and that goes to it's either A or B. It's either yes or no, black or white, that there's no gray area,
Hmm.
um, which was sort of traced back to Aristotle's logic that there were laws of the excluded middle and non-contradiction. Um, and
It's a
that
very Manichean way to see the world, if you don't mind me saying.
absolutely. And so
Yeah,
general semantics was this effort to see things differently. Um, that's why it's considered a non-Aristotelian system.
interesting.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it was actually devised by Alfred Korzybski back in the late the post-World War I period, where he's trying to figure out a way to get past all of the social ills that were going on, and also to find a way to make our thinking and our language better fit in with the revolution in physics that had changed a lot of our understanding of reality from Einstein and then Heisenberg and all of that.
Mhm.
Um, but that brings us to kind of the non-binary um, point and your activism in that regard. I was wondering if folks, especially I think folks who are not familiar with you or your story. I mean, if you would tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Are you talking about me being a trans woman?
Yeah,
Yeah. So I knew something was really wrong with me. I was very, very young. You know, it's really hard to put a finger on, but I wanted to be a girl from a really, really, really young age. Being raised by a very Christian conservative family did not really give me a lot of space to express that. And, asked my parents for help, told them who I was, didn't get help, and shut down a lot. It was really rough. I tried to make the best of it I could, kind of hid who I was for a lot of years, and started transitioning at 25. This was 20 years ago. So, it was a really tough path. But one of the stresses that I'm having right now is, I feel really strongly that what I was dealing with was primarily a medical issue, and there was a medical path forward. I'm kind of very dismayed by some of the modern politics that, as best as I can tell, don't have a scientific basis, kind of encouraging people to radically change their bodies, when we don't really have evidence to show that this is medically helpful. So I just feel like I can tell you firsthand, like, don't transition if you don't really, really have to. It is painful. It is expensive. It made my life immeasurably better, but I can really see how this would not serve a lot of people. So I find myself really at odds with the new paradigm for what being trans is, that it really seems to be more about politics than it is about what we know scientifically that will help people, if that makes sense to you.
sure, sure. Um, Still, and to uh, kind of tack between the extremes.
Mhm.
It was something that was very unfamiliar to most folks for a long time.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember when I was young hearing I think there was a movie, Myra Breckinridge. Um, that was like the first time it came into sort of popular
really.
culture, and it just was like, oh, that, that's even possible. Uh, but to a large extent, it didn't really become something well known until, really, I guess, about that time that you were going through it, right? That
Yeah.
it's almost a 21st century kind of phenomenon
Yeah.
for the most
I
part.
mean, we had Christine Jorgensen, obviously. What year was that? 1952, 54, somewhere
Okay,
in
right.
there. And, we started to develop a protocol in the 60s, the Benjamin Standards of Care. They came out in 1979. So it's definitely been there. I think what has really changed is, people in my generation have transitioned. We are, and generally the really, really top candidates, just in the sense that we were really, really desperate because people didn't do it back then.
Mhm.
I think it is concerning to me that the most difficult thing I've ever gone through seems to be something people feel that they can jump in and out of today. And it's not, coming back to, I mentioned like a Manichean view of the world, which is, separating things into good and evil. It's not so much like, I try not to be absolutist about this. It's not a mystery to me. Why someone would say to themselves, I don't really feel like I fit in either gender category. I'd rather present as something in between. I really support someone's right to do that in their personal life. I think that's a freedom issue. I think what really gives me pause is when I look at Reddit and I see a 17-year-old that wants to have a flat chest and to look like a woman. right? And what's a penis that works perfectly, right? You can't mix and match this stuff. There's no medical protocol I can show you or study that shows that's a good idea. So I think that I really worry that we are over medicalizing people and it's not going to serve them in the long run. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Hmm. But, when you were saying about that, there is, and there's kind of the old-fashioned idea that there are men and men and women are women, and that's
Yeah,
it, right? And that
yeah.
that is not quite the case.
Not quite, not quite. I don't know. It's more of a philosophical question. I feel like you're the academic, you can probably tell me, but it's like we're having all these esoteric arguments, like what is a woman?
Hmm.
And, for me, it's like I always feel like if you have to say you're the thing, you're not the thing. And what I see as I go through my life is people call me she, her. They treat me as a woman. Like men hit on me. I make friendships with women. I just find like as I go through life, people treat me this way. So I feel like that's what I am, but I think there's a political project to say I'm not. So it's difficult to square that circle.
Yeah. Uh, it's an interesting comment, if you have to say you're the thing, you're not the thing. Uh, that's that.
Well, let me ask you, like you're a professor, right? You're a leader. If you walk into, you can say, I'm the professor. Like if you can't lead someone in a situation, if they're not automatically looking at you, if you have to say, no, I'm the leader here. Like, are you the leader? Like I think you have to be the thing and people recognize it, but I don't know.
Well, it just helps to walk into the front of the room and put the papers down and start talking, and amazing what they'll accept. Just like if you go to a doctor's office, you don't actually get proof that the person went through medical school. You just sort of, accept the stage and the props and the act and all of that. But I was thinking because I was watching the second season of Squid Game,
Oh, really? I haven't seen this yet.
and there's a trans character in there,
Mhm.
and then there's this older woman, kind of like, makes me think of my mother, and then she's there with her son, and and she's like all confused about the trans character because and he's saying he hasn't completed the transition yet, or she hasn't,
Oh, yeah.
and and she's what, a man's a man and a woman's a woman. And the son's like, no, no, stop, stop talking that way. Because, he's all embarrassed and all of that. But
Yeah.
then as they're going through, the kind of horror that goes along with the Squid Game, that she treats him like she sees him as an ally and as a good person
Oh,
and all of that, which,
yeah.
it makes me think of my mother as well, who would have just
Oh,
find it hard to understand or just find it just weird or odd and all of that, but would also be sympathetic, ultimately towards the, real people
yeah.
and who they are and what they're going through.
It was weird for me. I'll tell you that. It's not like I didn't struggle with these same feelings and trying to accept myself. But at the end of the day, I mean, my life before I transitioned, I was a drug addicted mess. I didn't have friends. I couldn't have a job. I just stayed in my apartment, just waiting to die basically. And I transitioned and instantly, like just instantly, like life just fell into place. National figure within just a few years, running my own company, raising money. Just it really was what I needed to go succeed in life. And, I think I understand not every trans person is like me, but I do. I think I'm a credit to my country, my community. I think I'm clearly a better American in this state than I was before. So I understand people have reservations, but it's like I mean, ultimately I'm just trying to live my life like everyone else is. So
Mhm. That sounds so great, and I certainly say that about being a good American and all of
yeah.
that. Obviously, there are people, in and this becomes a political issue, and there are people who want to deny that
Yeah.
in all different ways. If from your experience and from your perspective, then how should, what would you say? I mean, how should folks understand, the idea of gender and sexuality?
I think you should just, boy, that's such a huge question. I think it's on multiple levels. I mean, if we want to get really in the weeds, the diagnostic criteria that they use for people like me, it's been politically hijacked. And I'm just flat out going to tell you the transition protocols that I transitioned under, they're drastically lower today, to the point where I think honestly any gay man could probably qualify for gender dysphoria, and you only have to have two of the six criteria. I qualified for all six, by the way. So, um,
What would be the criteria, by the way?
sure, it's feeling like you have experienced the feelings of the other sex, feeling you want the body of the other sex, feeling you would be happier with the other sex, things like that.
Mhm.
Feeling a great deal of discomfort in your gender role, like just go down the list. I had every single one of them. You got to understand, it's crippling. It's crippling. Like, you will sit there and just want something as simple as telling a girlfriend like you think her nails are pretty, and you can't say that stuff. You can't have that human connection. You can't. it- It's just every part of your life is constrained, and you feel like you're wearing a mask all the time, and no one really knows who you are. And that's kind of the old school transsexual model. I do think they're relevant public policy questions as we are trying to adjudicate, issues like sports or locker rooms. There's a TikTok that went viral a few weeks ago of a woman that was exposed to a penis in a locker room, which is just horrible. I don't support that in any way, and I think that there's some fringe activism that has treated cis women like instead of a treasured friend to help you on this journey and help you learn stuff, to treat them like a political opposition to be conquered, which is it's fairly disturbing to me. So I think that we need to reset, and I think we've got to realize we've all got to get along here. So that's kind of my approach.
Mhm. Well, and it makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
moderation, which I guess we we're not against everything Aristotle said, so it was moderation in all things.
Yeah.
Although someone added, including moderation. Uh, but
Yeah, the house is on fire. I'm not really in the mood for moderation in what I'm doing
yeah,
in that minute. So,
yeah. So you've uh, in a sense, you are in one way an advocate for the trans community, and in another way, a critic of the extremes that
yeah,
of progressive politics related to that, right?
yeah, I am. And it's not that my goal isn't the exact same. Like, my goal is dignity and healthcare for trans people. I
Hmm.
just have a difference in perspective in how we get there. And I honestly think this was informed by growing up in Mississippi. When I was literally the first student to ever transition at Ole Miss, which is our deep red conservative school where all the good old boys go. And I had to learn how to work with people there. And I didn't get the things I wanted by screaming or telling people they were monsters. I got the things I wanted by trying to get them to see my humanity, and by being thankful, and by really, like, I think about that era and the women that were willing to pull me aside and help teach me just how to fit into a social role that I missed socialization on. Like, I'm thankful to them for this day. So I feel like there is a very abrasive playbook that has become the default. And I think it's making enemies faster than friends. So my goals are the exact same. I just think our tactics need to change because there's a New York Times article that came out just a few days ago showing the shocking drop in support for trans rights. This is going down, and I think you can't look at this seriously and not conclude that we're doing things well.
That's and, and the point about just seeing the humanity is just so much at the heart of this,
Yeah, in my view.
that we're all human beings and and the need to understand and to be reasonable.
Yeah. I think, what's been really interesting, it's funny, as soon as we finish this podcast, I'm gonna call my friend Allison, um, who, she knew me back in high school, right? And, she's Christian conservative, got a daughter, all that stuff. And I know, like, I've never really talked to her about this, but I know she sees how much happier I am like this. And I mean,
Mhm.
she's seen me go from the kid in the class that was so nerdy and terrified that I couldn't even look people in the eye to, someone, I'm in media a fair bit, right? Like I'm probably one of the more famous people to ever come from my hometown. So I know she sees that and she's proud of that. So I think like sometimes the best way we can be advocates for ourselves is just go and live extremely good lives, rich lives. I think that's what we're working towards.
But you bring this up as a kind of, it's personal, interpersonal connection, people who really get to know each other.
Yeah,
And that makes all the difference in the world.
yeah.
Uh, but you're so active online, and again in that ex-Twitter arena. I see you're also on Blue Sky. I don't know where else you're. Yeah, and
I'm everywhere. I'm on YouTube. I've got a great show called Dollcast, which I do with
yeah.
three other trans women who are gorgeous and cool and interesting and lovely, just integrated, normal people. If you passed one on the street, you wouldn't think a thing about it. And we just talk about the real stuff.
But and what many of us has been talking about though is how this media, social media, electronic media, um, have had this very negative effect on people. And yet on the one hand, it allows people, say, in Mississippi who have no one else to talk to relate to, in a small town, say, to connect to others like themselves, um, on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, the environment is so conducive to angry responses and extreme kinds of responses that it
Yeah.
feels, and it was that Atlantic article talking about how antisocial we become
Yeah.
with that media. Uh,
I think it's very clearly turning many of us into the worst versions of ourselves. I don't think there's any question about that.
so how do we get past that?
You're probably not gonna like my answer, but I say this as someone in the tech industry. I think that the algorithms they use should be required to be open sourced. I think that if I read the New York Times, I can look at the masthead, I can see who they're hiring, and I can make a decision if I find those people credible. Good example, Wall Street Journal. Wesley Pruden is the editor over there. I've looked at his career and some of the choices he's made. I've come to the conclusion the section he runs is not something I should take seriously. That's a call I made with information. So I think in the same way, if Twitter is juicing the algorithm to show me certain points of view, I think I should be able to see that really openly. Same thing with Facebook. I think they're ultimately doing reporting, and I think the public has a right to know. I think just transparency with those algorithms is a real way to go. And to be clear, I'm sure, like with your job, you sometimes run in students that are addicted to social media. Like they hire, I know these people, the best psychologists in the entire country. They're trying to do nothing but keep your attention as long as possible. It's like your
Okay.
students are fighting with sticks and they're fighting with nuclear weapons in this war for attention. So I just think like all this stuff has got to get out there for the public to make their own choices with. And, then Congress can make better choices on how to regulate it.
But it's interesting that you say that. And I remember when open source became a big thing. Uh, as a metaphor as well. But and don't we already know pretty much what the algorithms are doing?
No,
And uh,
no.
but well, I mean, we kind of know that they're feeding us. I mean, we have folks, like that talking about that, like Tristan Harris with the social dilemma, and then just
Mhm.
how it is sort of kind of feeding us to keep at it and to doom scroll and all of that. So if we could have more transparency, but would that stop people from still subscribing and still spending time on this media and just you know, continue on in this way.
I don't think it would stop people. Like the addiction is there. I've got it. Yeah, most people have it these days. I think what it would do is open up the process, and I think it would lead to better content overall. I think if we looked at, if it was really obvious the ways they were showing us the hottest take to get us to really angry at stuff, I really truly think that could be the moment that Congress could address this. You mentioned the studies in this. I urge you to really look into those studies. Trying to get data from these places is extremely difficult. They will do things like create, 200 social media accounts from scratch and just record what it shows them because they can't dig into the API and get that all together. One of the first things Elon Musk did was, make the price of API calls to the Twitter API so insanely expensive you can't do research on it anymore. TikTok is a black box. They've never been forthcoming with their data about what they show people. So I just think top to bottom, it's one of the top issues facing the country. And just one more thing, like what this is doing to girls' health just
Hmm.
terrifies me as a
Yeah.
feminist. I thank God that I missed out on Instagram when I was younger because there's a study I saw that the average girl under 18 today spends 9 hours a day on her phone. Now, I do that because it's my job and I got to stay in the office X number of hours a day taking calls and doing email, but that's my job. Like to the fact that someone is doing that in their most formative years, that's fairly terrifying. So I really find this a national crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. I studied under Neil Postman, and he
Oh,
wrote
really?
about how television was undermining American culture.
Yeah,
And back in the day, some of the students were saying, "Well, but computers are different," and his view was, "Well, not really."
yeah,
And I think he was right. That there is. I'm not sure that there's any way to modify social media, for example, or modify mobile devices, and other than to just put a lid on them, to just
yeah.
try to stop them.
I would not be opposed to that. In all honesty, we don't let children drink past a
Right.
certain age. I'm sure Instagram is worse for girls than a glass of wine is. So, I think that should be on the table. Genuinely, I think raising up to 30,000 feet. One of the things I ran on very heavily was national security.
Mhm.
Granted from more of a cybersecurity perspective, but if you look at the military's recruitment issues, they're real. They're trying to find just young people that aren't overweight and don't have anxiety and are willing to go serve their country, and they're truly having a very difficult time. So I think I think this is clearly very bad for us, and I think that's called for. It certainly shouldn't be in the schools, I'll tell you that.
Well, Postman would very much agree with that. Well, but that's very interesting to hear about the military issue. I wasn't aware that,
Oh, it's
affected
huge.
recruitment.
It's huge. Even as we're here today, like as we're recording, Trump just kicked trans people out of the military, and I'm just like, politics of transness aside, like you need all the people you can get, buddy. So maybe this is not the time to be kicking people out. But he didn't ask me.
Yeah. Well, and that character in Squid Game, the trans character was I think a Marine in the Korean
Really?
Army. So that was part of his or her uh, part of the way that really made a difference in what defending the group there.
Yeah, this is so interesting because a generation ago, like before me, there were a lot of people with gender dysphoria that joined the military to try to turn themselves into men. And I'm just like, no, this isn't going to work for me. I was a very thin, effeminate, pop diva, obsessed. Yeah, I don't think that would have worked. But I'm
Yeah.
glad it worked out for the Squid Games character.
Well, he was, but this, I never know how to, with the pronouns
Don't
to
worry
use,
about it. Don't stress
but,
it. Yeah.
this was someone transitioning from male to female.
Right, right.
But still, retained the military training and all of that. Uh,
That's
and the
hilarious.
courage, that was part of it. So it was actually a very nice sequence that they did with
Oh, well,
it.
now I'm gonna have to go watch this. This is lovely.
Well, so has been this conversation, and
Oh,
you know, um, what do you think folks should know? I mean, moving forward, I mean, what do we, I mean, these are strange times, and certainly uncomfortable times for many people. What would you want people to know and to, prepare themselves for what's coming around the bend?
so I know a lot of Democrats are being apocalyptic about this, and don't get me wrong, I share extreme fears about this. But I'm also old enough now that, I've seen America through some presidents I loved, and I've seen America through some presidents that I didn't love. And it's the older I get, the more important this is to me. Like one of the things I've really seen decline over my lifetime is a shared sense of all being Americans.
Mhm.
And I know it sounds so trite, but it's so true. Like at the end of the day, if my neighbor voted for Trump, um, I don't agree with them, but we've still got to live in a country together and find a way forward together. So one of the things I've tried to do this time around is just frankly hate the other side less than I did the first time around. And yeah, I actually got a really lovely note from a Trump official today. I won't tell you his name or which department he works in, but a fairly high level official that told me he really loved my work and that he stood by my human dignity and he saw that and he would do whatever he could to safeguard that in his role. And I literally just sat on the couch right behind me and cried reading it. So I, I think that if we can at some point for us to get out of this deadlock where it's consistently terrible for half the country, I think at some point we're going to have to assume some good intent with one another. If not the elected officials, at least our neighbors.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm trying to focus on. So maybe that makes me naive, but that's what I'm planning on trying for the next 4 years.
Those are great words to leave us with.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. This has been a
Um,
wonderful conversation.
well, it's my honor. Thank you for reaching out.
You've been listening to our January 2025 episode of Semantic Reactions featuring Brianna Wu. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 29th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.